Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Naveed Hussein. I am a divorce attorney in Chicago, as well as an instructor for the Nikah Masterclass. Alhamdulillah, we're excited for another week, another episode of a new series that we're trying to start where we're going to be doing kind of a Q&A panel with myself, maybe Sheikh Joe. Today, inshallah, we're going to have Usman Mughni, a therapist. So, inshallah, we're going to bring on different professionals, bring different perspectives on kind of the common questions that people have about nikah and marriage in general. Today's topic is, inshallah, problematic in-laws, right? And when we talk about divorce, one of the top 5 reasons for divorce is in-laws. So much so that the Family Youth Institute, they cite problematic in-laws as the number one reason for divorce. And it's a very interesting problem because I think it's unique to our community. It's unique to us as Muslims, um, in the sense that you kind of have two generations and two worlds that are kind of clashing and showing its face, and showing up as symptoms in the in-law relationship. So, for example, let's say if you're from India, Pakistan, or really any other Eastern country, you're going to be more communal based. It's going to be more family based. And there's a lot of traditions and expectations and cultural norms and ways to respect each other. Whereas now you have us here in America or in the West where we tend to be a lot more individualistic, right? So from a macro level, you kind of see the clashing of the two worlds, a collective society and a individualistic society. So our parents, for example, they may be part of the more collective society and more about traditions, where we might be more individualistic. So there's going to be kind of a butting of heads right there, mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, being from different generations, but also from different worlds, right? When it comes to that on the macro level, where the family dynamic is different in each culture. But also what you see is kind of a shift in roles of the husband and wife, um, what the wife's role is in the house. And again, if that is being challenged by somebody from a previous um, from a older generation, then that also can cause problems. So that's kind of the background of this topic. And alhamdulillah, I'm really excited to have my brother Usman Mughni join us. And alhamdulillah, it was actually really awesome because I've known Usman now for 20 plus years. We went to college together for a little bit of time, and then he went his way, mashallah, and then we reunited just very recently in Dallas, as part of the Iman Cave series that's going on about marriage and divorce. And mashallah, Usman Mughni has been an integral part of that series. So jazakallah khair, Usman, for joining us today. Hope everything's well on your end.
Yakum barakallah feek. Jazakumullah khair for having me, bro. You'll have to excuse my voice, man. Subhanallah. It's been one thing after another. I had laryngitis, recovered from laryngitis when I was on the show last time. When I came back from Chicago just a few days ago, I caught the flu. So,
Subhanallah. So
alhamdulillah.
may Allah give you shifa, inshallah.
I mean,
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, man, and what you do?
Sure. Barakallah feek. Yeah. So, my name is Usman Mughni. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist located here in Dallas, Texas. I have a private clinic. It's called Peaceful You Counseling, and I work with individuals, families, couples. So I do a lot of premarital counseling, a lot of marriage counseling. But then on top of that, I work quite a bit with anxiety and OCD, depression. I diagnose and treat different mental health illnesses. I work with like pornography addiction, things like that. So it's a whole host of things, mental health related within the realm of like the family system. Yeah.
Okay, and how would you describe your clientele in terms of religion, ethnicity, background?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I see a mix of like Muslim and non-Muslim. Still majority Muslim because I do think that it makes a difference to go to a Muslim therapist, right? Because so much of our mental well-being is linked to our spiritual well-being, and you can't really separate the two, right? So when we don't say like lack of iman is a reason for depression. However, reconnecting with one's faith can help somebody who's diagnosed with major depression, right? So, yeah, and then that goes for like OCD and anxiety. And there's actually specific types of OCD that are only linked to Deen. I'm sure you've heard Khalil Center talks about it. It's called
Wow. Yeah.
scrupulosity.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And so we're
Subhanallah.
starting to see more and more of that, or maybe it's been there for a while, but like now it's finally starting to get a name. So it's known as scrupulosity, or yeah. So
Subhanallah. Subhanallah. We
mm,
got our own little diagnosis there.
but,
Alhamdulillah. In terms of marriage counseling or pre-divorce divorce counseling, how involved are you in that regard with the Muslim
so
community?
you're like pre divorce. Oh, I mean, it happens a lot. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of times people come to marriage therapy just to basically get confirmation that I think I should divorce, right? Sometimes people, and I'm sure you've seen this in your field, will use marriage therapy as a weapon, right? So they'll try and get the therapist to say certain things that they can use, like his notes or her notes in the court system. So like they already know ahead of time that they're headed towards divorce. So
Subhanallah.
like I mean, it happens quite often. Where people are basically on the verge of divorce. However, I do see, although it's few and far between, and we are talking about this on the show, um, the possibility of couples who are on the verge of divorce, have kids, but really want to have an amicable divorce. They don't like each other. Obviously, that's why they're divorcing, but they love their kids more. And so sometimes they go to therapy for that. It's rare.
Subhanallah.
I hope to see more cases like that where people are, being more mature and saying, look, we know this is, our marriage is basically reached a dissolution, but we still want to know how to co-parent, because the reality is, even though we're divorced, we're going to be in each other's lives at some capacity. You know,
Subhanallah.
I mean, honestly, indefinitely. It's even after your kids are 18. Like, what about
Yeah.
like grandkids? What about, what I'm saying? Like, what about weddings?
Marriages. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And then I guess in terms of like kind of the complaints or like the reasons that there is strife in Muslim marital couples, like can you identify kind of the top reasons for why there is discontent in marriages or why people aren't happy?
I mean, you know, um, I think like a few things, right? And we spoke about this kind of in one of the previous Iman caves before you were on. A lot of it is not knowing what you're getting into when you get married, right? Not like asking the right questions, having like unrealistic expectations, making certain assumptions before about the other person before you jump into the marriage, and then getting upset after. In-laws, so we're talking about, that is also a huge thing, especially within like South Asian communities. So I do see that a lot. I mean, it could be um, a case that's more about communication and so on, but somewhere in there sprinkled is, and in-laws are an issue.
So like
Yeah.
how does this in-law issue kind of butt its head or what's is there a typical scenario that the in-laws like when we're saying problematic in-laws like what are we talking about?
Right. I think it's about expectation. So there's a few things, right? One, as men, we have a challenging position of balancing birrul walidain with balancing the rights of our spouse, right? And sometimes because of a failure to like navigate our own emotions, we go through one extreme or another. Either we are completely negligent of our wives and say like, no, regardless, you have to respect my mom, and respect is misinterpreted as you have to listen to whatever she says.
Mm,
And so even though we're newlyweds, you have to go to every single like dawah, you have to go to every single event, and you have to do this and you have to do that. And if you don't, then I'm going to take that as like you disrespecting my mother. And then there are other people who go the other extreme and
mm.
already have issues with their parents, and then they get married, and then they will, stuff will go as far as like insulting their parents in front of their spouse, you know, as
Subhanallah.
under the guise of setting boundaries, right? Yeah.
So how much of this is like direct interference of the in-laws versus kind of indirect interference of the in-laws?
So I mean, I think it's both, right? But like, here's what I tell people: you're not going to control what in-laws do, right? So I think that like, however they are is irrelevant. That's not my concern, because the general rule of thumb is your ability to navigate through in-laws is relative to the strength of the couple,
Mm,
right? So you could have the most intrusive in-laws, but if you're strong as a couple, right, it's not going to really have an effect, right? If you're weak as a couple, even if your in-laws are nice, you'll create issues.
So you actually think that the in-law issue is more of a symptom than the actual problem?
It can be. That's one way of looking at it. It can be because like it's an external factor, like many other external factors, right? Like there's work stress, there's other life stress, like there's stress after having a child, right? So I look at in-laws as, of course it's a blessing too. I don't want to completely demonize it because I mean, Shara'an, we know that like even after somebody divorces, your former mother-in-law is still your mother-in-law. She's still your mahram. That's something that people fail to realize. So there is still Islam does still put a certain level of importance. Albeit they're not like your actual parents, but there is a certain level of importance, ihtiram, that we give to our elders, right?
Sure.
But I think again, it's the goal is to be a strong enough couple that whatever's thrown at you, you know how to basically withstand like the hurricane.
And then how would
Yeah.
you describe then a healthy in-law relationship? Like, how what is there a model? Is there something that we can aspire to? Are there certain principles or guidelines as to what a relationship should look like between in-laws, or like mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, or like what the man's role should be in that relationship?
Right. So I think each person sets like the wife will set the role for the husband, like set the stage basically for the husband, like and set boundaries with her parents, right? It shouldn't be the guy's role to like have difficult conversations with her parents and vice versa, right? Like it should be the guy's role to have these conversations, um, with his parents before getting married, right? So a lot of it is like the setup leading up to it, right? So in premarital counseling, I talk a lot about uh, you know your relationship with your parents because it's difficult to cope with change, right? And for our parents, like you have a mom, and maybe there's such a dynamic that between like your parents, like your dad and mom, they don't get along that well, and because mom doesn't have anybody to talk to, you're her person, right? So then she's complaining to you, she's talking to you like her best friend, she vents to you, and there's this expectation, and now all of a sudden you get married and your time is split, right? Have you properly like navigated that relationship with your mom and like transitioned properly and told her, look, I'm still your son, but it's different now, right? And if you haven't, then there's going to be problems.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
In in terms of, do you have any generic position or view on whether you should live with your in-laws, or whether the son should have his mom and his wife live with him?
Right. No, actually, I have a lot to say about that, subhanAllah. So I'll start off with this, and you know this. We're not a culture or religion that believes in nursing homes. So let's put it out there, right? For the most part, right, we don't, may Allah preserve our parents. Eventually, they will reach an age where they are reliant on us, right? They reach that stage of dha'f, they reach that stage of like weakness where they need constant care. Um, you know, we want to be the ones to be there for them. Now, the mistake that I think a lot of people make is that they say that, no, I want to live with my in-laws, or I want to live with my parents. The guys will say this: I want to live with my parents from the get-go just because this is what they're used to, and so on. I say have at least a few years, 5, 10 years, where you're living on your own with your spouse. Build that understanding, build that foundation, so that when that time comes when your parents actually reach old age, you're equipped as a couple. Like you guys understand each other. You've had that quality time together. You've had that understanding. Your communication is strong, and so then you're going to be able to handle situations where our parents, obviously, when they're old, everything is aching, they're irritable. You're going to have patience, as opposed to a couple who's been living in that situation forever, and then they're already burnt out by the time the parents get old. I don't know if that makes sense.
SubhanAllah. So I mean, so no, that makes absolute sense. And so with that kind of, again, I know we're talking generally. There may be exceptions to this,
Right.
general position. But what about a guy who wants to get married, but the only way he can get married is living at home? So how do we strike a balance between living with the in-laws and or postponing marriage because of that reason?
Right. That's tough, subhanAllah, right? Because some might argue that, like, I mean, you know, if you're not in a position to be able to even like afford a small apartment, are you really ready to get married? But then, what about a medical student, or what about like, somebody who's about to get into residency and like doesn't have a salary now, or, but that potential is there. It's tough. Like, I mean, each scenario is different. like, as difficult as it sounds, like if you could wait, I would wait until
Mm,
you have that ability. I've sometimes seen wonderful parents who have kids who are in medical school, and they'll say, "Look, for the time being, we'll pay for your apartment."
yeah.
You know, and you know, if families plan in such a way where they don't drop like 100G on the wedding, and actually, like, plan out that money where they can give the couple, you know, like rent for like a year or so, even if it's a small humble apartment, while they establish themselves. Alhamdulillah, I think that would be the best route.
So, huh. No,
Yeah,
that's good advice.
yeah.
In terms of like premarital counseling, how much of premarital counseling um, do you take on discussing like these in-law and family type issues? Like, how big of a component of premarital counseling is this topic?
Right, right. I mean, especially with like South Asian couples, like I'll always ask, always probe and say, okay, is this an issue? Have you guys talked about expectations? Like, what are your mom's expectations of her? What's her dad's expectations of you? What's the relationship like so far? So on, right? Because you're married, it's two families that are getting married, not just two people, right? And so I bring it up almost all the time. Of course, each situation, each case is different, right? So for some people, they already know that, okay, this might be an issue, and like we spend the majority of premarital counseling actually tackling that and seeing, is this viable? Is this, does your spouse have the type of temperament to be able to have thick skin sometimes? Do you as a spouse have the ability to be able to defend your spouse while still, defending them in an honorable way without like insulting your parents? But like, so in many cases, the overwhelming majority of premarital counseling is actually about
Wow.
navigating through that. And the couples who do that, alhamdulillah, and are, prepped, they thank me later, alhamdulillah, because it saves a lot of headache. Because issues usually start what, like at the, at the wedding,
Oh yeah, the
right?
jewelry, what hall we're gonna go to.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Have you seen the in-law issue be expressed differently in different cultures? Like, is the in-law problem different in the Desi community versus the Arab community or the African community? Like, I'm just curious. I'm not sure if there's even if it makes sense to go that minute. But have you
Right.
seen it be different in different cultures?
I mean, families are different, right? Like we also don't want to, because there are some, I keep saying South Asian families, right? But like, I mean, there are some, Desi families where the in-laws are really just hands off,
Mm,
um, and they're, like, and I've seen, Arab families where they're very hands on, or they're not. Like my wife is actually Arab, so I'm Desi, my wife's Arab, like, and so like
yeah,
I have my in-laws are Arab,
there you go.
uh, but it's, you know. I don't have the research to say that, like, here are the differences between
Makes sense.
cultures versus
Yeah.
not,
No, I'm just
it's
wondering
a
if
case
that
by
came
case.
about. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because that'd be interesting. I have a feeling, and again, I guess I'm not research based, but that it's like more of a South Asian problem, like a Desi problem of the in-law expectations and kind of the role of what a daughter-in-law is supposed to be is very different. I feel like.
Right, right.
Um, so
Yeah.
I see it more expressed in the Desi community than I do in other communities, and I'm
Right.
actually
Right.
thinking and wondering if that's going to kind of die down as we all become more individualistic and kind of let go of our culture and our traditions and things like that. I almost feel like as we atomize into more isolated little nuclear families, that this
Mm.
in-law issue may actually be something that we miss, right? And so I
Right.
just wanted to kind of talk about you know making sure that the in-laws are a problem, but I think that we have to strike the balance between identifying them as a problem versus in every scenario keeping them out of our lives, right? And I think that's the other extreme that we're seeing now, is that families breaking apart based off of this in-law issue.
Right. 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 Yeah. I mean, look, I also think that there is a huge benefit to having an extended family. I feel like, we, especially in the West, we miss the benefits of like a collectivist society, right? We miss the idea of like free babysitting, and also
Yeah,
like, yeah, and our kids getting, you know tarbiyah from like their grandparents and their uncles and their aunts, and on both sides, and so on, and everybody living within proximity. um like, and I know in Chicago there's like Surrey Lane and stuff. There's some places where all families like live together, but like, um like, so I want to make sure that we're not completely villainizing like the idea of in-laws, because there is benefit to it, right? But again, a strong couple knows how to utilize that. A strong couple can keep relationships, reap the benefits, while at the same time knowing when to say, okay, but we're not comfortable with this, or we're trying to teach our kid this, right? And so, mom and dad are always like having, I don't know, like Bollywood stuff on TV, and we don't want to expose our kids to that, right? So, we can set that firm boundary respectfully that, like, hey, like, Abu Mama, like when the kids come over, just they can't be watching that.
Communication. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I guess to that point, like, how do we identify taking advantage of the advice our in-laws give versus them interfering, right? Like, I think
mm,
that it's almost in the eye of the beholder, right? In the sense that for me, like my mom telling something to me, I'm looking at it as advice,
yeah.
whereas maybe somebody else looks at it as interference,
Mm,
right?
right,
Um,
right.
so how do we, any tips or tools on kind of how to identify whether your life is being interfered with?
Right, right, right. I mean, if you if you're able to come at it from a position of like, yes, a lot of people will give advice, right? Alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair for that feedback. But like, I'm more comfortable with this, then you're able to brush it off because they're not gonna not give advice. That's
Yeah,
just,
yeah, exactly.
comments are going to be made. Like, I mean, I'm sure even like we're grown adults, right? But like, your parents are like, I'm sure when you see your parents are like, oh, you're not
Yeah.
eating, it's like all of this, they're always going to be our parents in that sense, right? Like, now if you have your own insecurities, your spouse has their own insecurities, then you're going to personalize it and take it as, oh, what do you mean by that? Am I not a good parent? What do that's a you issue. You have to kind of work on building your own confidence, and then having that sense that, look, my spouse and I, mashallah, we run our own ship. We know what we're doing. We have full autonomy, and so therefore we're just going to take it as advice. Alhamdulillah, if it's good, great, we'll take it. If not, there's no obligation for us to take it. you
Yeah,
know
yeah, and just
yeah,
responding in a respectful manner. And I
right.
think, what you said earlier is kind of what I've been thinking about throughout this conversation is that, you know, if we look at it for a moment, that the in-law issue is more of a symptom of the underlying relationship between husband and wife and their communication ability, their understanding, their emotional intelligence. Like, it seems like a lot of this could be kind of working on ourselves to help solve the in-law issue.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Like,
So,
yeah, yeah.
and I guess the other kind of wrinkle to this is that when you have like cross-cultural people marrying each other, for example, and now you have two sets of in-laws that have totally different expectations, different culture, different ways of even showing respect to each other. Um, have you seen that as a problem, or um, is that coming
I,
up at
I
all?
I mean, I mean, yeah, so. I mean, I'm in a cross cultural relationship, right? So, I mean, yes, there are certain like different expectations, but my wife and I, we kind of made our own culture, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
right? And that was like, we had brisket at our wedding, not biryani or makluba, So I mean, that's just what and we got flack from both sides, but it's like, whatever.
I'm sure.
But it was delicious. So yeah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
Mm.
That's awesome. And like, what is a like a way that we can make boundaries with our in-laws without coming off as disrespectful, right? Like, obviously in, in Desi culture, I'm sure Arab culture, like there's a decorum that you're supposed to have with your parents, right? In a way
Right.
that you don't want to make them feel bad, you don't want to talk back, you don't want to be disrespectful, you don't want to like become their parents. So how can we draw boundaries in a respectful manner?
No, that's a great question, right? Like, let me, so first of all, like, just people conflate um, obeying your parents with respecting your parents. So those are two completely different concepts, right? The first generation of Muslims did not obey their parents. Their parents told them to worship idols. They didn't listen to them, but they were respectful in their disobedience to their parents, right? So, I think highlighting that, number one, as we lay the foundation for setting boundaries, is just being aware that sometimes uh, we're pressured out of guilt, right? It's like, oh, if I don't listen to my mother, khalas, I'm going to be cursed, I'm going to go to hell, this, that, right? And because of that, like I've seen it where people will just get so worked up about that. Then when they try and set that boundary, they're coming from a place of like just these like flood of emotions. Like I want to say no, but then I'm pushed between two directions. That's it, great. I'm going to hell anyway. So now let me just lose my cool with my, and instead of like taking a step back and saying no, like I'm still being, I'm in control. I'm still being respectful towards my parents, right? This is, a conversation that my wife and I had beforehand of what we're comfortable with and what we're not comfortable with, right? So boundaries, excuse me, boundaries fall into three general types, right? So there's rigid boundaries, there is like semi-permeable boundaries, or there's diffuse boundaries, right? So rigid boundaries, like, and I've seen couples who are like this, where they're just like, okay, that's it. This is our nuclear family, and no information gets out whatsoever. So if if we're pregnant and we have a kid, we'll tell people once the kid graduates high school. So it's like I've had family members, mashallah, who are just so they private that, like, yeah, you wouldn't know until like the kid's like 1 year old, and like
Yeah.
you're like, who is that? And I'm like, oh, by the way, yeah, I had a kid. you know and then and then and
Mashallah.
then you have other family members who have like such loose boundaries that like everything, including by the way, like struggles in the bedroom and so on, get to either friends or parents, and something that's completely inappropriate, right? um, and then there's semi permeable, excuse me, which is where, like, okay, yes, we understand that we have families and we want to share certain things, right? We don't want to be completely isolated. However, these are a list of things that we are comfortable sharing. These are a list of things that we are not comfortable sharing. And before we share, check in with each other, right? Like, hey, I was gonna tell my mom about, like, us going on honeymoon. Cool, great, but like maybe don't share how much we're spending on the honeymoon or what hotel we're specifically staying at. Or whatever. Okay, that's fine.
That makes sense. Makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
And again, talking about communication, I think that having these types of conversations with your husband and your wife could be very awkward, right? And I think that we find it hard to have these kind of intimate, touchy discussions with our spouse.
right,
And I know that men and women like to communicate differently. For
right,
example, if girl might want to be face to face and talking, whereas the guy might want to be in a car and talk,
yeah,
or go on a walk and talk. So I guess, it's generally speaking, what communication tools could you offer the listeners to help talk about this very touchy? And it seems like almost like, when you talk about your mom, it's like you're talking about your khandan and your honor, right? So
right,
like,
right, right.
what
Yeah.
tools can you give us to have this conversation in an effective manner?
Like, yeah, I think before approaching the conversation with your spouse, like, understand your own pain points, your insecurities, and so that you're able to convey like the deeper meaning, right? Like, I'm afraid because, like, I always wanted a spouse who's really respectful or gets along with my family, right? So I'm extra weary of, like, saying no all the time to my family or something like that, because it'll start to make me feel like I'm being pulled away from my family, and that's a fear that I have. And so there, that gives the spouse room. It's more to work with than just, hey, you need to do this,
Yeah.
right? It's like, oh, okay, this is a fear that my spouse has. Like, how can I address that fear? No, no, I'm not trying to pull you away from my family, and this is maybe what we can come up with, because now I have something to work with, right? As men, we have to learn to dig deeper sometimes and actually, share the emotion behind whatever the request is, right?
I was thinking. Let me know what you think about this arrange. So when we think about like a guy being a protector, I feel like one of the roles that a guy has in protecting his wife is to protect him from his family or from outside,
Yeah,
stressors and things like that. And so when I think about family dynamics, I actually think of it as me and my wife are a team, right? And we're dealing with our family, right? In the sense that
right.
my mom, your dad, your uncle, my uncle, like these are our aunts and uncles and our, parents,
Yeah,
in a way that we make sure, that the respect level is the same. Like, I
yeah.
feel like when you think tribally, it's almost a problem.
Right, right.
Like,
What's a beautiful,
yeah, go ahead.
like, thing that I see sometimes, right? And I aspire to be like my wife and I aspire to be like couples like this. The couples who, like if the wife sees that her husband is not giving the most ihsan to his mom, meaning her mother-in-law, she'll be like, hey, listen, dude, like, I want Jannah for you. Like,
Mm,
maybe work on the way you said that to your mom. and vice versa. It's
mashallah.
like, hey, listen, I don't like how you spoke to your mom, right? Because I want Jannah for you, and I want, like, that's where you're really with that akhirah centric view of, like, I want you to be the best Muslim, best version of yourself. So that means that I, like, even though we have boundaries, I want to make sure you as a spouse are doing everything you can do to get into Jannah, because I want to be there with you, right? So make sure you treat your parents like, can you imagine like
That's
having a
beautiful.
spouse who like says that to you, that like, no, Naveed, you're not treating your mom as good as you need to be.
SubhanAllah.
Like, you need
Actually,
to follow her more.
my wife actually does.
So my
Uh,
wife says to me, yes,
Alhamdulillah. No, but you're right. You're right.
may Allah bless our spouses, yeah.
That
Yeah.
needs to be the dynamic. That again, you're helping each other benefit from your own family and from the other family, and using these as means of gaining hasanat,
Right, right,
rather than some battle that you each are facing each other in alone against each other.
right. No, absolutely,
Allahu
absolutely.
Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Alhamdulillah.
So we actually have a link in the comments. So for our listeners in the audience, we did put out a link. It's for a Slido link, so you can go ahead and put some questions down if you have any particular topics or particular questions that you wanted to ask. You can put it in the Slido. The link will be shared. If you're watching on YouTube, the comment should be pinned. If you're on Instagram, you should see a link somewhere in the comments. So, inshallah, in the last few minutes, we'll answer some questions. So, in the meantime, feel free to populate your questions and vote on the questions, and we'll try our best to get to those, inshallah.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, I mean, the the in-law issue is so unfortunate because this external interference is actually having on the ground impacts of people getting divorced, right? Like
Right,
it's almost like
right,
they're not even divorcing the spouse, they're like divorcing that family, they're divorcing that
right.
in-law.
Right. Yeah. And so some of the saddest things that I've seen is like where couples who actually have a lot of potential or good people actually get along just couldn't make it work out because of family. And what
Yeah,
the families need to realize then, right? And inshallah, Naveed, like you and I, like soon our kids are going to be of marriage age, and
yeah, yeah.
we're going to be the in-laws, right? Is that like the kids are the ones who have to deal with the consequences afterwards,
Mm,
right? They're the ones who are going to replay the tape over and over again. They're the ones that are going to be in long-term therapy because of like you know our decisions as parents, right?
yeah.
You know,
And
uh,
that's a good perspective. So maybe comment on like somebody like me and you who we're the parents and now we need advice on how should we treat our daughter-in-laws or how should we treat our son-in-laws. I mean, any
right,
tips for that?
right. No, so there's this is a interesting, extremely relevant concept in psychology called triangulation. And this is really from a psychological perspective, this is really what's going on at the heart of in-law issues, right? So triangulation is basically, it's similar to what I described earlier, right? So you have two sets of parents. You have a set of parents, right? Mom and dad, right? Now, mom and dad have a kid, and sorry, and mom and dad have a kid, and there is a rift between mom and dad, and so both start complaining to the son about each other, right? We've seen this, right? Kids get dragged into like divorces all the time, right? Uh, and throughout, like the kid hears everything bad about his dad, he hears everything bad about his mom from his dad, and so like the the son almost like, and not in a gross way, but almost like becomes like the second spouse to his mom,
Mm,
right? I see this quite a bit where like that pressure is there, and then because of that initial failure of the parents to have a good relationship or talk amongst themselves, right? The mom is very dependent on the son, and the son starts playing this role where he's like, hey, I'm gonna have mom's back anytime, like mom, my poor mom, she's in such a difficult marriage, I have to be there for her always, right? And then the guy gets married, and so the mom is like,
mm,
wait, shoot, like this is my support person, right? And so now like you as a parent have to realize that it was as difficult of a position as you were in, right? If you're the mom in this position, or if you're the dad in this position, right? Like that wasn't your son's responsibility, that wasn't your daughter's responsibility in the first place, right? That's what you have community for. You have friends, you have other peers, right? Or go to a marriage counselor, fix your marriage instead of putting it on that child, because that's honestly at the root of a lot of this in-law stuff. If you like go way back and you kind of look at this like generational trauma, that's where
mm.
it comes from. That's the
Wow,
deeper thing.
subhanallah.
It's not, yeah. And then the mom
Subhanallah.
is going to, behind the whole, like, mother-in-law being like wicked and like, critical and so on, is that because she became critical because she lost her son, and she had no other coping, she had no other relationships, she had no other backup, right? And so now this other woman has taken my coping skill.
Yeah. Subhanallah. It runs deep, man.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody needs therapy.
But
Subhanallah. Have you seen um, the reluctance of going to a therapist go down in our
yeah, yeah,
community?
big time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's been a huge, like, so I'll just give you an idea. I mean, I've been practicing for like almost 12 years now. Um, um, when I came to Dallas, so I moved private practices. I used to work at Alexian Brothers in Chicago. If you're familiar with
Okay, yeah, much of
yeah,
course.
yeah, yeah. And then I
I
had
was
a
born there.
private practice. What is
Yeah,
that?
I was born there.
You were born in Alexian Brothers? Oh, that's
Yeah,
okay, okay.
yeah.
But I worked in the behavioral hospital, so yeah,
There you go. Yeah, I
yeah,
wasn't born
yeah.
there.
I was born in Hinsdale. Or no, I was born in Fox. My kids were born. My son was born in Hinsdale.
Oh, mine
So,
too, mashallah.
yeah. Or really? Yeah. Mm.
La-
So anyway, when I came in 2014 to Dallas, I was one of the few like Muslim therapists. Now there's just like plethora of them, mashallah. So many new grads and so on, and a lot of it I feel is because imams are more vocal about the importance of mental health and so on, right? I think that it is a lot more accessible and a lot more accepted now. I think the next stage that I hope you know people reach is that people are comfortable going to therapy even if they don't have any major quote unquote problems, right? Like, I go to a therapist, my wife goes to a therapist. I have no shame saying that, right? I don't have a diagnosis. I just want to be the best version of myself. I want to make sure that I'm taking care of myself, like, physically, mentally, spiritually, and so I want to make sure I have all of those covered for myself and for my family.
How much of, I don't know if this is controversial, but how much of this the therapy versus friendship, like, is do you think that therapy would be needed in many circumstances if friendships were strong?
I mean, yeah, I see those as two different things. I see those two different things, right? Because a friend is not going to diagnose you. Hopefully not. If you don't have friends like that, right? I don't know if you hang out with Fahad and you just diagnose people. but like good sohbah, in conjunction with therapy is the best, right? Your therapist is not supposed to. Your therapist is going to be friendly, but your therapist is supposed to challenge you. Your therapist is supposed to, help you navigate through difficult situations. And your therapist is supposed to help you um, build a stronger community, right? So, I mean, there's a plethora of research on the importance of community and friendship. There's a study known as the Harvard Study on Adult Development, right? I would encourage everybody to look this up. It's one of the longest standing studies in psychology to date. It started back in the Great Depression and still going on now. It's on like the eighth or ninth generation. And basically, in a nutshell, the study looked at what what makes people happy, essentially, what contributes to overall health. And what they found is that people who had meaningful connections, it didn't even have to be a spouse, it could be a best friend, it could be like a cousin, whatever it is, right? And kept those meaningful relationships throughout their life, just had overall better health. They had less chances of diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, depression, anxiety, like all across the board. They were just overall healthier. So community makes a huge difference, and that's something that I'm more and more interested in now. Is like, how can we? You got me on a tangent. I'm sorry, man. Like,
No,
but
please. I
like,
love
but
it.
but like, no, it helps so much. Subhanallah. Like, wallahi, like I've lost a few clients slash patients to suicide, subhanAllah, over the years, and I often think, like, if they
Subhanallah.
had that strong community, if we also as a community were good at reaching out and asking, I mean, qadar but would they be alive today? So it has
Subhanallah.
large implications. I hope that we get to become like vibrant communities that are just, if you're struggling, you feel no shame in like reaching out, right? You feel no shame, and like, and it doesn't even have to be like, well, I'll tell you, bro. Like, so both my wife and I are sick with the flu, right? And I had to think a few times, oh, I don't want to disturb people, so on. Like, we'll just keep ordering Uber Eats. I'm like, oh, it's getting expensive. Like, and so then I reached out to people. I'm like, hey, I'm sick, and they're like, immediately they're like, jazakallah khair for
Oh
the
my
opportunity for ajr, right? And I'm like, yeah,
alhamdulillah.
like why do we do this? Like we need to be comfortable with you, because like if the roles were reversed, I would definitely do that for my friend, you know?
SubhanAllah. No, 100%, man.
Yeah,
And I feel very strongly about this as well.
yeah,
This is a tangent as well, but I'm part of a non-for-profit community space type of a thing called
mm,
Oasis,
mm.
where our goal is to impact faith through family and friends, right?
It's not,
Like,
it's not, it's not Islamic Oasis, right?
not Islamic
Oh,
Oasis,
okay, okay, okay,
just Oasis. Yeah, that's
okay,
different.
okay,
Just Oasis.
yeah,
And attacking faith through family and friends, and
mm,
really what we're seeing is that there's a lack of family, a lack of friends,
mm,
a lack of community where Muslims can just go and connect and build their relationship with Allah through relationships with other people. Like
mm,
men are not meeting as often; their third spaces are going away.
yeah,
The women's connections are kind of dying, and so I feel just as strongly about reviving the communal nature of us as Muslims here in Chicago,
mm,
especially.
mm,
It's just
for sure.
such a big impact,
No,
subhanallah.
no, no, absolutely,
Have you
absolutely.
seen is do you think that men and women respond differently to therapy? Like, I feel like I can a lot of men could be kind of, like, I'm not just going to sit and talk about my feelings
Right.
versus, I now hear that there's different modes of doing therapy, like walking therapy or
Yeah,
driving,
I've
that type
heard
of
that.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Right,
So
right.
do you see a different
I,
reaction between men and women?
sometimes it's I think it's how it's pitched, right?
Okay.
Like so a lot of times for men, right? If I pitch it as, look, this issue, be it temper, be it pornography addiction, be it anxiety, is interfering with your ability to be qa'im, to be a
Mm,
leader for your family, to do what's right, right?
yeah.
Uh, Rather than, hey, let's just talk about your feelings. They're much more receptive to it, right? Because then it's about self improvement, it's about growth, and it's like, okay, cool. This is I hate talking about my feelings, but if this is what I have to do, grow, alhamdulillah, right? So it depends on how it's pitched, right? Whereas like sometimes for sisters, and it's not always the case. Sometimes I don't want to generalize, but maybe sometimes for sisters they're just like, look, I just want a safe place to be able to share my feelings, and I want kind of that sounding board and so on, right? So it depends on like how you pitch it to the person.
Okay. So you don't see, there's this been argument recently about that therapy is more beneficial to women, or the way that we're doing therapy is more in line with how females, recover from depression, for example, versus, the way that men do. And I know this doesn't necessarily have to do with in-laws, but I guess what I'm talking about is breaking the boundary for men to be comfortable with
Right,
therapy.
right. I mean, I think some of it might honestly have to do also with the lack of male therapists, right?
Mm,
Even though there's like, mashallah, tabarakallah, like more and more, it's still extremely disproportionate, right?
yeah.
My graduating class of 10 was me and 9 girls, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's still, even though there are more and more men going into the field, it's still, still very, very heavily, female dominated,
SubhanAllah.
right? So that might have something to do with it.
And what impact does the therapist's own background and values and religion have in the way that they do therapy? Like, Muslims going to non-Muslims, or Muslims going to atheists, or does that matter?
Well, I did, like I said at the beginning, dude. Like it matters big time. It absolutely matters, right? If you're paying somebody, for a 50-minute session, do you really want to spend the first several sessions explaining each and everything about your culture and like, why it's not weird that you married your cousin or whatever? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's a waste of time, right? And then also, I think there's a comfort in knowing that there's some relatability there, right? That's one. And then for people who value deen in their life, like it's don't look for just a Muslim therapist. Look for a Muslim therapist who has a grounding in their deen, and not
Yeah.
only has a grounding in their deen, but knows how to utilize aspects of the deen within therapy. That's very important, because now, alhamdulillah, we are seeing a plethora of Muslims entering into the field. You're going to get like a whole variety of different views, right? So you're going to get Muslims who are a little bit maybe more like, like don't follow all of the tenets or don't believe in all of the tenets, versus not, right? Like, even there's been debates among Muslim therapists about like the LGBTQ issue, for example, right? Like, where some are saying like you have to be an ally, and if you're not an ally, you have no reason to be a therapist. While others in the camp that I follow is that, look, we can be respectful, but we're not going to be bullied into changing our stance on our faith. That's not okay either. How is that good for my mental health?
Yeah.
So we are going to kind of see that more and more. So unfortunately, when I give advice to people, I say, like, hey, like, especially if the person is more religiously inclined, it's like, look for a Muslim therapist, but look for a practicing Muslim therapist. Now I have to make that delineation, but in a way that's good, right? Because we have those options, right? Before it's like, okay, maybe a not practicing Muslim therapist is better than a non-Muslim therapist. I don't know, Now we have choices, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. What are some, as we kind of wrap up here, any, what would you say is the main takeaway, or kind of the main thing that we should keep in mind when it deals with interfering in-laws?
Right, like I said, I'll say that line again, right? The ability to navigate and deal with in-laws is relative to the strength of the couple, and the strength of the couple is relative to the strength of the individual. Understand, work on yourself, understand your some of your own insecurities and pain points and so on, right? Like, I mean, I'll share personally, right? So I was a single dad for a number of years, alhamdulillah. I love my son like anything, right? And like for the longest time I had this like feeling that I always had to prove that I was a good dad. And so that led to a certain insecurity that anytime anybody gave any type of advice, even if it was just like something innocuous, like, I would get defensive unnecessarily. Like, are you saying I'm not a good dad? And I had to work on that, because it's like, wait a minute, like, if my parents are saying something, if somebody else is saying something, they're not saying you're a bad father. You don't have to keep like getting defensive. That's on you. That's your own insecurity, right?
Mhm.
And like, I had to work on that. And obviously that makes a difference, because now my wife, who obviously has a big role in my son's life as well, right? If she has an opinion, she has an idea, right? I'm not going to be defensive. I'm going to think, look, this is a collaborative effort. But had I not dealt with that insecurity, there would have been problems, right? So strengthen yourself as an individual. Understand your own like emotions, traumas, pain points, work through them, and then like work through them as a couple as well. And inshallah, whatever life throws at you, inshallah, you'll be able to weather the storm.
Alhamdulillah, no, jazakallah. So we're going to move, inshallah, into the Q&A. So again, for the last few minutes, we'll be answering questions on the Slido link. So you'll see the link in the comment section. It should be pinned. And then you should see it in the Instagram chat. You should see it in the YouTube chat. So we'll go ahead and turn our attention to the questions. So Usman, I'll read out the questions, and then you can answer them in whatever fashion you'd like to. So we'll start with this one. What if your husband is forcing you to attend family dinners every week with disrespectful in-laws?
With disrespectful else, okay. So I mean, is the issue the frequency, or is the issue the disrespectful in-laws, right? So that's one thing. Like, maybe having a conversation with your husband about, like, is like are there weekly gatherings because like they're a tight knit family? Is the husband worried about losing that tight knit feeling? Is it coming from pressure? Is it something that he wants? And so then maybe coming up with a way and saying, like, look, how can we come up with a balance where you feel still just as involved with the family, but like, maybe we alternate, where like some, because we also have to strengthen our own family unit too, right? So there should be weekends where it's just me and you, and then when we have kids, it should be weekends where it's just us and the kids. That's healthy too, right? The husband also recognizing that, if I give up some family meetings, that doesn't mean that I'm abandoning my family. I'm just creating a healthy balance, right? As far as the in-laws being disrespectful, again, as a man, as a Muslim man, it's your job to protect the reputation of your spouse, right? Doesn't mean you yell at your mother or father or sister-in-law or sister or whoever is saying those disrespectful comments, but point it out, right? And just let them know, hey guys, that's not cool. And then also let your spouse know, right? One huge mistake that guys make afterwards is women will sometimes, they'll see things that we don't see and say, like, oh, did you realize, like, how your mom said something? And the guy's like, what do you mean? Like, she just said this. Like, no, she said it. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
you don't have to go into this like long, lengthy explanation of, no, you said husn, she didn't mean it like that. It's like, listen, if she said it that way, I'm really sorry. It shouldn't have happened. That's it. Khalas. Like you have no idea how much that like
This is
small
golden,
sentence
bro.
right there. That
This is
understand
golden.
will like
Yeah.
avoid so many arguments. Just that level of understanding. It shouldn't have happened, right? Um, in this sister's particular case, like I mean, if it is a reoccurring thing, I think like the husband needs to sit individually, talk with the family, and make sure that he expresses that he's bothered by it. This is not coming from the wife, right? This is coming from him. So
SubhanAllah. All right. Next question I have for you is: Mother-in-laws keeps going against daughter-in-law's boundaries with grandchild. She doesn't listen, just ignores. What to
yeah,
do?
right. So again, it should be the son's job, right? Like the guy's job then. Like so first of all, do you guys agree on those specific boundaries? Like for example, if it's a boundary of like, hey, look, our kid's not allowed to eat sweets until like after dinner time or something like that, right? And the grandparents are like sneaking like mitai and stuff, right? So it's like like you as the husband need to be on board and be able to like tell your parents that like, hey, look, this is something that I'm not okay with, right? This is not like, oh, my wife doesn't like this and so on. I'm going to get in trouble at home now if it's something like me as a father. I don't want this to happen, right? And I know you guys are coming from a good place and like you just want to, like you love your grandchild and so on, but like this has to stop, right? You as the husband have to be the one to like do that. And if it's reversed and if it's the wife's parents who are being, the wife has to have that conversation, you know.
Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah.
Okay.
The other questions are kind of along the same line. Um,
Yeah.
if my husband doesn't act like the protector and takes his family's side while we have fights, how can I solve this? He thinks he's always right. I think this is the same person.
Yeah.
Um, Basically
Take your
prioritizing
question.
family over, yeah, basically prioritizing family over the wife.
Mm, right, right. Yeah, and the thing is, like, I mean, these are two completely separate relationships, and we need to start seeing it as such and treating it as such, right? You can love your spouse and you can love your family, you can love your mother, and you can, it's about, like I said in the beginning, it's about transitioning that properly, where like you have a conversation with your mom and like, you let her know that look, like things are going to be different, like in fact I tell people like after marriage for the guys especially, like, you should strive to treat your mom even better,
Mm,
right? Because you're not going to see them as often or play the same exact role, obviously, because you're trying to balance like multiple things. So like the times that you do see your mom, like it should be with the utmost ihsan to kind of like bring that balance and compensate, you know.
no, that's great advice.
Okay.
Any final thoughts? Where can people find you, and what you are up to?
No, no, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, like you can just go straight on the website, ask any questions, book a session, or you can follow me on Instagram. It's at Mughni Mental Health.
Do you
Yeah,
only take clients in Dallas or across the country?
across country.
Okay,
Yeah, across country.
alhamdulillah,
Yeah,
alhamdulillah.
alhamdulillah.
No, I mean, again, jazakumullah khairan for taking time out and, helping us out with this problematic in-law issue. It was really great to connect with you after so long.
Alhamdulillah,
If you're still in
alhamdulillah.
Chicago, inshallah, let's meet up.
No, no, inshallah. I just came back on
Oh,
Thursday.
you just
So
came back,
inshallah, yeah,
subhanallah.
yeah. I literally just came back on Thursday, but inshallah,
So,
like
inshallah, man.
next time I'm there. Yeah,
No, it's awesome. And then next time I'm in Dallas, I'll hit you up too,
no, for
inshallah.
sure, bro. All right, Allah
All right,
barak
keep
fik.
me near du'as, inshallah.
Yeah, man. Assalamu
Assalamu
alaikum.
alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair, everyone.